To read to you this morning the feeding of the 5,000. Mark 6:30. Earlier in the chapter, Jesus had sent out the 12 disciples. Interesting, he sends them out as disciples, and in verse 30 he refers to them as apostles. It's the first time they're referred to as apostles in Mark's Gospel. So they're on a sort of cusp between learning and being sent. In the interval, when they're away, Mark tells us about the death of John the Baptist. The apostles returned and met with Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. There were so many people coming and going that Jesus and his disciples didn't even have time to eat. So he said to them, "Let us go off by ourselves to some place where we will be alone, and you can rest for a while." So they started out in a boat by themselves for a lonely place. Many people, however, saw them leave and knew at once who they were. So they went from all the towns and ran ahead by land and arrived at the place ahead of Jesus and his disciples. When Jesus got out of the boat, he saw this large crowd, and his heart was filled with pity for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began to teach them many things. When it was getting late, his disciples came to him and said, "It is already very late, and this is a lonely place. Send the people away and let them go to the nearby farms and villages in order to buy themselves something to eat." "You yourselves give them something to eat," Jesus answered. And they asked, "Do you want us to go and spend 200 silver coins on bread in order to feed them?" So Jesus asked them, "How much bread have you got? Go and see." When they found out, they told him 5 loaves and also 2 fish. Jesus then told his disciples to make all the people divide into groups and sit down on the green grass. So the people sat down in rows, in groups of 100 and groups of 50. And when Jesus took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, looked up to heaven and gave thanks to God. He broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. And everyone ate and had enough. Then the disciples took up 12 baskets full of what was left of the bread and the fish. The number of men who were fed was 5,000. And at once Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to Bethsaida on the other side of the lake, while he sent the crowd away. Very familiar with the feeding of the 5,000, and very familiar, I expect, I thought when I read this, very familiar with preaching sermons about the feeding of the 5,000, what an amazing miracle it was, and how Jesus took a few bits of bread and 2 fish and did this amazing miracle so everybody was healed, which is the core of the story. The fact that I don't particularly want to talk about this morning does not mean that I'm one of these people that wants to talk all around the miracle. I was reading a very good commentary, really, this week on the passage, which reminded me of the way it usually goes. The commentator said, of course, we don't really know what happened, but what's important is the significance of it. Great. In other words, the whole business with the miracle is a bit hard, but we like the idea that Jesus feeds us with plenitude, Let's not go there, all right? We have 5,000 people plus all the hangers-on, women, children, and what have you, who could have said when the disciples tried this one on later, no, that didn't happen. We have here a major nature miracle where Jesus feeds 5,000. But having said that, I just want you to not go home this morning, because I don't need to go home this morning thinking, we learned a bit more about the feeding of the 5,000. Probably after this week, you aren't all thinking, we need to learn something more about the feeding of the 5,000. We have things in our own lives, and I want you to think this morning a little bit about Jesus and looking at Jesus and Jesus' heart and Jesus' attitude to these people, because they are his heart to you and me and his attitude to you and me this morning. And wherever we are this week, we need to look to Jesus the way they look to Jesus and know what he has in his heart for us. They'd come back from this first missionary journey. They had all sorts of things going on. They'd gone, you remember what he said, they'd gone from village to village. They hadn't had much kit. They had one lot of sandals, you know. You can imagine the ones that had one lot of sandals and the sandal broken, so they had sore feet. And they'd been to various houses, and some people had accepted them and some people had not, and all that stuff. They'd healed people, and that was stressful, and they hadn't healed people, and that was stressful for another reason. And so it was a big thing. And so they need some rest, and they don't get it, you see. Everybody's coming in. There's no time even to sit. Jesus, though, Jesus does not say, things are going well. We need to build on the momentum. I can imagine either a minister or a politician saying, we need to build on this now. Right, let's get together and let's do the next mission before everybody loses interest. He doesn't say that. He is not program-orientated. He is people-orientated. He says, well, what does he say? I'll read it for you. Come with me by yourself to some lonely place where you can rest quietly. Come with me by yourself to some lonely place where you can rest quietly. That's a good thing for all of us to hear this morning. He says, come to a lonely place. In modern terms, he says, what you need is some personal space. What you need is some space. And I can give it to you. Come with me and we will find some space. Of all the people and the demands crowding in on him. Now, I think personal space is quite interesting. Because so often we are crushed by things. Many of you will have lots of people making demands on you. Personally, family-wise, professionally. All these days, all those emails piling up, or texts, or a thing that comes up and goes, I want to Skype. You can't get away, can you? You can't get away. And it's not just that you're busy. Personal space is not just about being busy, is it? It's about the pressure that produces, the demands that are made. We become very much people whose shape is defined by all the things around us. We're like the bit missing from the jigsaw puzzle. It's defined by the shape of the bits round it. Oh, it's got to have a hole here and a sticking out bit there. And because I need to be this sort of minister and everybody expects me to be that sort of minister, I had to be that shape, or that husband, or that grandfather, or you name it, I could be. We are shaped and pressurized and molded, sometimes with the best will in the world by those who love us most, to be essentially the shape and the gap left by everyone else. And I think with personal space, Jesus says, come away so that you can be the shape again that you actually are, that I want you to be. I had a rather bizarre picture of this, of one of these bouncy castles, you know, these inflatable bouncy castles. Terrible things. But anyway, I've been in various situations where I've hired them, and when you see it, and it's all on the ground. It looks like a big lilo. It looks like a great mess, really. Well, that's like I often feel in life. And then you begin to inflate it, and it goes. You know, it's this amazing look, is it? Sort of goes. It's like a resurrected elephant. It's sort of, and all the cracks sort of shake out, and a bit comes out, and you go, isn't that like restoration? That I become the shape. I'm not crushed and flat and creaking, but I become the shape that God wants me to be. Come away, he said, for some space. Come away for some personal space. And he says, come away with me. Space is not necessarily particularly nice. Space can be empty space. Somebody lost in the middle of the Sahara Desert, trekking across sand dunes because they're lost, does not say, oh, great, what a lot of personal space. And you will know that if you are people who have been busy and constrained, to have the space can be almost as frightening as being constrained. My gosh, who am I? What am I going to do? I've got a completely free day. I always wanted this, but now I'm not sure I do. We need full space, don't we? Full space. And that's what Jesus gives us. He gives us solitude, not loneliness. Come away, he said, for some space. And he says for some quiet as well. That's sort of related to it. But I feel that with the quiet, what's good is that when he said, let's come away for some quiet, you feel that Jesus is not inviting them for a day of seminars. He wants them to be quiet as well. And he's just going to be with them in the quiet. My peace I leave with you, sort of thing, you know. So often we make our own noise. As soon as we want to turn on Radio 4, as soon as... We've had a cacophony of noise with this election, haven't we? That news programme went on forever, didn't it? At the very beginning, they had these people who were experts about everything, talking about something or other, and they talked for about 24 hours, didn't they? Amazing. And as a footnote, the results came on the bottom. But they went on talking, whatever happened, I don't know. In fact, it was much better with the sound turned off. Because all it just said was who was winning at the bottom rather than what everybody thought. But it's just a noise, isn't it? Unbelievable. But then we create this noise as well. We make our own noise. And it's just not that we're noisy people. I was looking at some of those photographs of some of the pictures on the television of those great old boys at the VE Day commemorations, sat in a wheelchair covered in medals, wearing some great beret that meant so much. Real heroes. When they get to the silence, do you really think that is silence for them? That is not silence for them. When I've spoken to these kind of people, that is a cacophony of noise, of things they remember, of pain they suffered, of people they lost, of anxiety they have. To be quiet is a positive thing, not a negative thing. It needs a full quietness. Silence is not a vacuum. Jesus says, come to a quiet place. I will take you to a quiet place. Now, I don't want to make any sort of technical comments about the music, which was great this morning, but sometimes when we're practicing in the week, we're practicing the tune, and then one of our leaders, like Len, says, stop, he says, there's a pause here in the music. That's when you don't do anything. And I realise how much more difficult it is not to play anything, to play something. You want to play something, I'm here to play, No. In this bit, we're not going to play anything at all. And I have heard somebody conducting something to say, play a pause. Because silence is something. It's not nothing. When Jesus talks about peace, it's like a commodity. He says, my peace I give to you. Not have peace when I've taken everything away. I'm not terribly good at word processes. But, when I go along and then you've got a gap, so you press gap, and then you've got a gap between the letters. That's fine. But then somebody sends me some sort of file, and I think, I'll adjust this. This is good. And I can't believe it. The gaps move around with the words. The gaps have a life of their own. I said, this is supposed to be nothing, but it's moving around. So there is something tangible about peace. And I think Jesus says, I give you that. Come to a quiet place with me. We will do this. Full silence. And out of that, he brings us to rest. And he says, and rest. Rest is the same sort of word as restore, isn't it? And because he's going, perhaps to just sit with them and be quiet with them and sleep with them. I don't know. They're all tired. They go to be restored. And with Jesus and with space and with rest and with him, then he has his heart to restore them. Not to just re-equip them or to re-inspire them or redirect them, but actually have a day doing, in relation to the big scheme of mission, nothing. And yet to positively restore. How often have we been on a holiday and had a rest but not been restored? So what happened? I slept a lot. But I wasn't restored. I laid around being stressed about what I had to do when I come back, sort of thing. Or I wasted the time. But I was not restored. You will have wasted thousands of hours in church services not being restored. All that could be said was during the sermon you sat down and rested your legs. To be restored is a much more organic thing, isn't it? It's not just to go home and plod on. But the big thing here is that this is Jesus' heart for them, and it is for you. So that this morning, in a way, it's a good time for a bit of restoration. Where you need a bit of personal space, this is a good place for personal space. This morning you might have noticed that there's not a table here. We're not going to do communion, because I had a very strong conviction on Thursday that if we want a bit of personal space, we don't necessarily need to be queuing up and having communion. So it's going to be just a bit of space at the end, in a moment. And quiet to be restored. That's what Jesus has on his heart for you. Can you imagine if you had been one of these disciples Jesus let us go? Can you imagine they would have said, oh no, we're not going. We'd rather stay here with all the crowd. It's nuts. And then he feeds everyone. Now you might say, oh, is this about the disciples or is it about the crowd? The mind of Jesus is much the same for all of them. Do you notice that with the crowd, for instance, he has concern and compassion and his heart goes out to them. And he says, when they get to the end of the day, get them all to sit down. And that's very compassionate, isn't it? I have never seen anywhere where you're trying to feed a lot of people and you get them to sit down. You make them stand up in rows so you can dole it out, or you make them queue up in rows so that they can get it from the soup kitchen sort of thing. The last thing you want to do is get them to sit down. But he says, sit down on the green grass, which is the only place in the Middle East you'd ever want to sit down. He has compassion. And so when it comes to teaching, he teaches all the crowd, but he teaches all the disciples as well. And he sees that he teaches them because he has a heart for it. He has compassion on them. It says, his heart went out to them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. They were lost, really. Sheep are not stupid animals, but they're kind of semi-domesticated. They're not like fully trained dogs or horses that are with people, but they're not wild animals that fend for themselves, so they too tend to get lost and drift around. And there was a lot of them around then, so they were a good illustration. He was angry. There's the implication, of course, that there are false shepherds, that the leaders of Israel had not been teaching them, and he was angry about this. But the disciples were still, in the making, weren't they? He taught them all, and he had a heart to teach them. Does Jesus want to stand up for an entire hot day and teach people? He has his heart for this, doesn't he? And he teaches them. He doesn't say, I've got a handout. He doesn't say, look, sit them all down and give them this. All right, this is not information, this is communication. He teaches them because they're lost and drifting. They've all turned up, but they don't know why exactly. He teaches them. It says that he teaches them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. In other words, it is quite specific. He doesn't say, I think education is good for people. But if they are lost as sheep, as the shepherd, he wants them to be found. Now, this morning, as I say, the Lord has a heart to teach you. Not theology, not a great big stuff about everything, but where you are a bit lost, where you need a bit of teaching, where you need a word from the Lord. You're not sure what to do about that. You're not sure about the conversation you had. You're not sure about this in work. You're not sure about this temptation. You need some guidance. You need some wisdom. Just say, Lord, this is where I need to be taught. I haven't come here for a big learning. Where am I feeling a bit lost? When there have been more than one place when I've been on holiday, sometimes here, sometimes abroad, particularly abroad, when I'm lost and I say in pidgin, whatever it is, French probably, two things, waving the map to the friendly European local. Two things, where am I and where is the campsite? Not tell me about your wonderful town, which they sometimes do at length. And so if you're a sheep, you don't want a general review of the whole of the Middle East. You want to be found. And so to be taught this morning is to be taught what you don't know, what you need to hear. Where you are hurting, where you are afraid, where you are lost, where you need a word, just that, not the whole New Testament. Lord, I pray that you would teach me. But from your heart, because it said, and because he had so much to tell them. God does not hold out on you. He is not sort of mysterious in the way that you have to bash on the door and say, oh, Lord, I need to. No, he's actually keen to teach and hear, that you should hear, that you should be taught. And finally, he feeds them. And we get to the miracle. He feeds them all. I don't think 5 loaves and 2 small fish is really going to do for 12 disciples, leave alone Jesus as well. Leave alone the 5,000 other people. They all get fed. And this is a great miracle, a great physical miracle. Now, it's true that Jesus can deal with hunger of all sorts, a hunger for love, a hunger of acceptance, a hunger for affirmation. Indeed, all abstract hungers, but that doesn't mean it's less of a miracle. It's no good turning the whole thing into a parable. They all eat bread and fish. Indeed, it's not even slightly mystical like the Old Testament sort of manna from heaven sort of thing. And although the manna was something they could eat, probably some sort of fungus, you feel it's kind of God's feeding us. Hey, this is bread, the sort of bread they had, or they could have bought if they had the money, the sort of fish they got out of the sea. They eat. It is on his heart not to just have a quiet day. It's on his heart not just to have a teaching day, but it's on his heart to actually feed them. And so what is on God's heart? To feed us in the most practical ways of all sorts. Now, here you will be all absolutely different. What you need, even in small things at the moment, but what you could be thinking could be, Lord, I've come this morning. If you would restore me and give me space, and if you would teach me and give me a word, then I shall be equipped to do what I need to do when I go home. This is not what that says. Yes, as Christians, we're not called to do nothing. When they had the miraculous catching of the fish, they had to put the net over the boat. Here, they got to dole the stuff out. But it is not enough, is it? He will provide. I was talking to somebody this week in a very practical way, told me that the Lord had provided for them when they were hard up with something that they needed to wear, that somebody just gave them. They weren't just restored and taught and went to see if they could find something to wear. Something was provided. And for you, in the most practical ways that you might want, or whatever it might be, the Lord says, I will provide. I think this is extraordinary. But it's a miracle. And you might like to bring something this morning and say, Lord, I actually need this. I really do need this. And I seek your feeding. I seek your feeding. And notice how he held the bread, he broke it, he gave it to them. It's not doled out in a sort of mechanical way. It's a personal way. Again, he feeds. So it is a great message, is it not? That this morning, just as with them, The Lord's heart for you and me is to restore us with some space and some peace and some rest. To teach us at the point where we're a bit lost. And to feed us where we are in need. And to do it personally. Is that good? But I want to say one other thing from this passage before we all go home feeling wonderful. This passage teaches us that this restoration, this peace, this feeding, this teaching happens within all the ups and downs and busyness of the life of discipleship. Because although this is on Jesus' heart, look at the day these disciples actually had. This day with Jesus, where they were going to be quiet and have space, doesn't come off at all. If I was a disciple, I would be thinking, What happens is he promises peace, restoration, silence, personal space. What do I get? I get a whole day with a massive crowd of people. I get a whole day when he does nothing but talk. And then at the end I have to organise a great big picnic and clear up the rubbish at the end. That really speaks to me as a minister. Oh, Lord, bless me with this and this and this. And the Lord says, actually, there's this church. And you can spend all the time with all these people all the time, going to meetings and people will be talking all the time. Then you can organise the harvest supper and you can clear up and move the chairs at the end. Lord, I was thinking about personal space and blessing and peace and quiet. How many of you have come to faith on the feeling that what I need is restoration and peace and care? And finished up by coming to a church where you are tied up with this and this and this and this and this and this. And is it not that I feel sometimes that, okay, the Lord is the Lord for others, and I'm feeling that's great because that's me. And then when I'm a disciple, he seems to be the Lord for other people, and I've got to be the one. What about me, Lord? I needed a rest. I needed to sit down. I needed some peace. I don't want to be around here with a basket picking up all the bits and pieces of bread and fish that 5,000 people have left all over the place. Why don't they pick up their own stuff? The restoration, the peace, the silence, the teaching and the feeding is in the context of discipleship. And it is not straightforward. We do not spend all of our times on retreat days. We do not spend, why did I used to like going to spring harvest? I like to go to spring harvest because nobody demanded anything of me. It was great. I had a lot of personal space and people taught me good stuff and we ate well. It's not always going to be like that. It's not like here. But Jesus engages those disciples. They're arriving in the boat and he decides he will do the teaching. He decides not to say, oh, bad place, lads, back into the boat, let's go to the other side. He doesn't. He engages that. It is intentional. We are called to serve other people. We are called to be in the difficulties of life. Then he resources us. He's there right through the day for them. He provides the teaching and the food. But at the end, one of the most important bits of this whole passage, at the end, he sends the crowd home. It is circumscribed by his lordship. When you get stuck in because he leads you in and he extracts you. And when I can see this, I feel I'm not a victim of the crowd. I'm not hopeless. But I'm taken on with the Lord in a positive way. That means that sometimes I will not get my quiet time, my quiet day. It might be that I am called to some difficult stuff. But those days will come. Jesus seems to have had a cycle. He went away with them and talked, sent them out. They came back and he had another time with them. He sent them out. He did that himself. Make no mistake about it. The Lord will meet you in quietness and find you space. But at other times when you are serving other people, bearing in mind the restoration and the silence and the space was really defined by Jesus, it's extraordinary how that can happen even in a crowd. Sometimes when you get the celebrities come out of a hotel or a place, and the whole place is full of paparazzi and crowd, And the bouncers, the ones in the suits and the dark glasses, they go, like this. God does that for us when we are in a crowd that we're supposed to be in. that there is space and peace, even in that. And those disciples would have found that because they had a whole day with Jesus, which was the crucial thing. And although they could have had a great day, perhaps somewhere else teaching, he taught them all day in the context of them being disciples. We learn so much more on the hoof than just going to seminars. My life has been far more changed by ministry than by Spring Harvest. And would we have had all that feeding if we hadn't had the 5,000? We'd have just had 5 loaves and 2 fish for the quiet day. It's in the stress of it that you know your need, that you pray and the Lord provides, and you are fed. Because then, when you are working, you know you are hungry. You have a day lying on the spiritual beach, and you don't get hungry. So this morning, this is not an idealized thing. This is a wonderful picture for us to learn. And I would just say to you that as we spend a few minutes, we finish our service, I would just encourage you to say, Lord, I need some personal space that you can make me my shape. Lord, I need some quiet, and I need to be restored and to be taught and to be fed. But not as an escape from everything, but from in the midst of my life as a disciple.